Hey Regit, what are some of your small town WTF stories? I'll start. I was an EMT for a small company. One of our trucks hit a deer in a neighboring jurisdiction. Argument ensued about who got to keep the deer. Man on M throws cash register at store clerk. After pursuit that ends when he is captured on the roof of the bowling alley. He ends up in the hospital for having broken an ankle running. Tiny emergency room means he is placed in one of the two neighboring beds, the other being occupied by the store clerk. Hilarity ensues. I got a parking ticket for $5 for blocking a sidewalk. When I didn't pay it in time, they added on a $2 late fee. In Jefferson City, Mo, the tickets are $3. Lobbyists visiting from bigger cities are said to skip on paying the meter and frame the tickets in their offices. High school classmate brought to school a decaying human skull he found on his farm. He wasn't sure what it was. It came from a manhunter, then stuffed into a drainage tube on this guy's farm. When spring came, thawing snow and rain washed the remains out into the clearing where he found the skull. My hometown once had its major roads shut down because a rafter of wild turkeys decided to hang out in the street for a day. Why do I get the feeling you like telling this story just because you get to say the phrase rafter of turkeys? I lived next to a farm in Siler City, NC. One day as a kid I walked down the road to explore under the bridge on my road. To my surprise, I found a bag full of rotten cow carcasses. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona in the 80s. As a kid, one of my favorite places to go with my father was Ruff's Guns and Liquor. And it was exactly what it sounds like, a combination gun and liquor store. I thought that gun porn liquor stores were a common thing. Maybe I live in redneck land. I once lived in a small town in the Appalachians and I have a story somewhat similar to yours. The town was too small to support any kind of hospital, but they had a diner that functioned as both the local watering hole and the doctor's office. The doctor owned the place and also served as the main cook. You could sit at the bar next to someone and not know if they were getting something to eat or if they were about to get inoculated. This town was very small and remote. The schoolhouse I went to is the smallest public school in that state by a long shot. The senior class. This school went K-12 and still only had about 40 kids. Not all of them lived in the town. Did a family tree project and discovered that they were all related. Not even distantly. It was like third cousin or something. The punchline. They still held prom. Also, our neighbor who lived somewhat close as the crow flies, but about 45 minutes driving through mountains, gave my mom her old wood-fired range because she had just been hooked up with electricity and didn't need it anymore. Keep in mind that this was the mid-90s. I have too many stories about that place and the crazy folks who live there. I didn't think any towns like that still existed, but they're out there. They're kind of like time capsules. This gives me hope that Twin Peaks is out there somewhere. I remember we had this old guy we called the Gum Man. He would hang out in the local Piggly Wiggly, a grocery store, all day and ask little kids if they had gone to church that week. If you told him you had, he'd give you a piece of gum. It was only later in life that I found out that he wouldn't give any gum to black kids, only white. After typing this all out, I realized how creepy the whole thing actually was. My rural Washington state town was one of those little pockets of bigotry that people forget exist in the Northwest. We had precisely one Jewish family for a while, but they moved away soon after an elementary school teacher told one of their little girls that she and her family had killed Jesus. We also had exactly one black police officer, out of around 4 total, who was constantly treated terribly and assigned to crap work until they finally fired him for no good reason. There's still a lawsuit pending about that, I believe, and in both of these instances, someone wrote an anonymous letter to the local paper saying that the buttholes involved represented the silent majority of the town. We also had the typical hillbilly M problem that made headlines when our sole 3-unit apartment complex blew up in the middle of our minuscule downtown area. Then there was the time that the local pagan family decided to do a midnight ritual on a railroad bridge and they all got hit by a train. You can imagine what the silent majority thought about that business. On top of all that, our high school mascot was a potato. We had a dog run for mayor, and Lewis and Clark mention us in their journals as the place where they got a particularly crappy night's sleep. I can't be the only one that's cracking up at the image of a high school pep rally full of young kids cheering on the hometown potatoes. Small town in central southern Ill. A man's horse died and he hadn't yet taken it to the dump. Some drunk rednecks got together about a week after it died and decided they should take it instead. They tied it behind their truck and started dragging it to the dump, but decided it would be more fun to drag it around the square a few times. Was fine until the skin tore and it started leaking horse fluid and parts all over the pavement. Small town in CO. Our dog died while we were away and the vet didn't have a fridge big enough for it. We wanted to bury him at home, so he went into the fridge of the local restaurant for a few days. Dad says it was really hard to dig the hole because the dog was near frozen with his legs all sticking straight out and he had to make it bigger than usual. My hometown has an endless supply of these stories. Every spring my hometown has a livestock festival, a week-long celebration of livestock. One lucky high school girl is crowned the livestock queen and presides over the festivities. A prestigious position to be sure. During the livestock week tickets are sold to an event called Cow Patty Bingo in which an indoor showroom is divided into over 100 small squares and a cow is released onto the floor. If you are lucky enough to have the cow crap into the square you had chosen, you my friend are a winner. My high school tried that. The cheerleaders chased it all over the place. It was so frightened of the 30 odd random screaming girls, it attacked one, and then promptly busted down the gates and fled. That was the last time my HS tried that. I was 16, hanging out on the roof of a local establishment, because what the frick else are you gonna do in a small town America, and a cop in uniform, who was drinking, offered me a beer. 25 now and still occasionally get ID'd, so it's not like I've ever looked older than I am. I went to a field party in WV after bailing my buddy out of jail for DUI. When we got to the party, his arresting officer was there and they drank a beer together. Later the cops brought out boxing gloves so they could box some people at the party. A DUI in WV was $500 fine. I grew up in Memphis but I used to go to this really small town in Arkansas a couple weekends a month. I got a bowl cut with an actual bowl on my head by a barber with 3 fingers on one hand. My neighbor was known to bring in junkies and one of them was a H addict. Well, this guy disappeared and after about 3 weeks a smell started coming from one of my neighbor's numerous camp trailers in his yard. They checked it out and the dude was dead in there. The autopsy reported that he had heart failure due to injecting pine sap because he ran out of H. I have a lot more stories. I grew up in a town of less than 500. Who knew pine sap was so deadly? I was hanging out with my grandma's neighbor's 2 grandkids. Wes, the boy, wanted to go back in the bush. We lived in a rural area, and so his grandmother let him take me and his sister down the back road on an ATV. We were back there barely 10 minutes before we came across the most horrible stench I've ever smelled. Wes drove towards the smell, and we found a cow graveyard. There were 25 plus dead cows in various states of decay. Wes' sister said she was going to throw up so we left. Not really that WTF, but I was quite young and had nightmares about zombie cows for months.